This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. Laura Bennett with you over the next few weeks, going into the archives, looking at some of the best conversations from this year that are well worth a second listen over the Christmas period. Today, hearing from sobriety advocate, fitness coach and author Justine Whitchurch, looking at our relationship to alcohol, sharing from her own personal experience about something that particularly over Christmas, over the holidays, can be a really complicated dynamic. More parties, more socialising, more family pressures, perhaps having a drink is something that you habitually turn to. How do you know when it's starting to become a problem? And if alcohol is something you're relying on to truly cope with things that may be better dealt with in other ways. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, welcome to a brand new season of Undistracted. 10 seasons in now. So much to catch up on. If you're new to the show, thanks for joining us, and make sure that you do take a look at the great conversations we've had. This is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and dealing with some of the stuff that can get in the way of it. Today we're talking about alcohol, addiction, and the impact that it can have on a life. According to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, the majority of Australians 14 years and over consume alcohol. In 2021, there were almost 1,600 alcohol-induced deaths in the country, and in the last 2 years, alcohol was the most common drug of concern people receive treatment for. Attitudes around drinking, though, are shifting, with 23% of the adult population not consuming alcohol. But for those that do drink, over a quarter end up over the recommended limit. Justine Whitchurch is a sobriety advocate, health and fitness coach and writer who almost lost her life in 2012 when her alcohol addiction became too much. With a music career, kids and relationship in the wings, entering rehab was do or die for Justine, and now she's set on helping others break cycles of addiction. Let's welcome Justine to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are an incredible advocate for what a life can look like when you take situations that are difficult, you take addiction, and you turn it into a life, I think, that shows the power of transformation, the power of clarity as well. Your journey with alcoholism, we'll get to different aspects of it in this conversation, but I want to start at the beginning for you. Your first introduction to alcohol. When did it become something that you were trying to connect to in life?
I think, my journey with alcohol probably started like every other teen. So, I was introduced to it at a party when I was maybe 15, 16, and there was nothing untoward at that point in time. I think, over the next couple of years, it was definitely just a very sporadic social thing. I don't think I ever felt like I needed it. I've always been an extroverted introvert. My things like my anxiety weren't social anxiety. It was other forms of anxiety. So I didn't really need it. It wasn't until I was probably, I think, the first time that I, now in hindsight and through, the work that I've done in rehab and counselling and that sort of thing, where I learnt that alcohol could be more than just that for me. It could be a form of medication, was when I was 19 and I had split up with a boyfriend that I was on again, off again, on again, off again. And, he was the love of my life, apparently, at that point in time. And I remember he was overseas and I was house sitting a family friend's home, and it was late at night and I was already in bed. I got up to the wall phone. Showing my age. The conversation was around, we can't do this anymore. And I remember I went to the fridge and I grabbed a couple of stubbies back then that were just in the fridge. And I took them back to bed and I drank them until I was calm enough to sleep. And I think, that's probably one of the first times that I now know, didn't realize at the time, that I was using alcohol as a form of medication to calm my head, to calm my nerves, and to, escapism kind of thing.
And I think like a rationalization that we can bring to our use of different substances, whether it's alcohol or otherwise, is how I'm using it, quote unquote, bad, or am I at a place where I'm in control still? What do you think that line is between when something is something that we're relying on and something that we might just be enjoying on a night out?
What is the line? I think we all intrinsically know. We just don't want to acknowledge it. So I think for me, a telltale sign is if something starts to become overwhelming or challenging, and one of the first thoughts you have is, how can I escape this? Or how can I rid myself of this feeling through alcohol or drugs? Then you are relying on it to cope. And, I would say that there's a very large percentage of the population that do that. Over time, we've just eroded our natural coping mechanisms, and we're all looking for the easy fix for everything in life. And, the unfortunate thing about alcohol in particular, and drugs, but alcohol, is that it's such a socially accepted means of coping that we don't flinch, because we're like, well, everybody else is doing it. It doesn't mean that it's right, but it's what people do. The kids are playing up today. We'll come over, we'll have a glass of wine. It's our first fix for anything that's slightly overwhelming. So I think we know, but it's a very hard pattern to break based on how accepted it is in society.
So is our language around alcohol something that needs to change then? Because even if you're just enjoying, a social drink at a barbecue, there is a sense that this is how we let off steam, we do it this way. So do we need a change of perspective around alcohol as a whole?
I think so. There's been some great ads, over the last few years where they probably talk about it as in, what is your relationship with alcohol? And I think that if we start to look at it from that perspective, we get a better understanding of where we sit with it. And, they're talking about alcohol in 20 years' time being like our conversation around cigarettes.
Yeah.
We're not often looking for the pitfalls. We're only looking for the benefits. And there are so many pitfalls. It's ludicrous, really, when we break it all down. But definitely the language needs to change. And even our terminology with, there's not a lot. Some people don't associate with the term alcoholic or alcoholism, even though, on a technical term, they probably are if you go back to science-based evidence. So, we've got things like grey area drinking now and, alcohol misuse syndrome, all of that type of thing. I think less labels, the better, because there will be more people that will be able to identify with where they're at.
And if we take a couple of steps back for a second, your relationship to alcohol, if we look at it that way, really was something connected to your experiences of anxiety. And in your book, Sobriety offered everything or delivered everything that alcohol promised. You do speak about these habits and these tendencies you had even as a little girl that looked a little bit like OCD might these days, right? It was never diagnosed for you, but it was sort of this practice of having to have things a particular way. Is anxiety, or are anxiety and alcohol always a bad combination, do you think? Like, is that something that made it difficult for you?
Definitely. So, I had this conversation with somebody the other day. We use alcohol to fix the anxiety, but the alcohol creates more anxiety. So one feeds the other. That's the unfortunate thing, is it's, when we drink alcohol, yes, there's a short-term numbing of that anxious state that we're in. But chemically and physiologically, after a period of time and the next day, you're going to be more anxious, because that's what it does. That's what this drug does. So they are a really bad combination, because we initially become reliant on them to medicate ourselves through that anxiety. But then we become more reliant on it based on the fact that it's making us more anxious. It's a difficult one. I don't think they're ever a good combination.
No, and you paint such a particular picture about just how bad it can get with alcohol to then tell the story of how much better it can be without it. If we look at the sort of dark side, if you want to call it that, of your experiences, your own sense of value was huge in that. A lot of romantic relationships played into how you thought about yourself, what you thought you could and couldn't do. Can you paint a picture for us of what your life was like before you decided to make the change and pursue sobriety?
Yeah, I think clearly it's it spans a couple of decades really if I look at it in my early 20s, and then the massive fall from grace in my 30s. I think I saw a real loss of self during that time. As a teen and as a very early adult, I was very, very courageous. I think I was quite, I had the underlying mental health stuff going on, but I had a real sense of passion and purpose, and I wanted to take on the world. And I found the more I had an inclination to drink, or the stronger my relationship with alcohol got, it took away a lot of that empowerment from me. So, through subsequent relationships, marriages, breakdowns, all that type of thing, and getting myself in situations where that sense of self was even more eroded, I had no direct connection with myself anymore. I will say I was just surviving. So my sense of purpose and all of those things, those wonderful combinations that give us drive to get up every day and do something, and know that we're part of something larger, and know that we have a connection to others in the community and the world. It didn't exist. I was just literally existing, So it was a really sad time, I think. I was very depressed, very, very anxious. And I would say lights were on, no one was home.
And as someone looking, in at your life from the outside, you would think you had quite a few reasons to get up in the morning to live. You've got kids there, you're in a relationship. You also had at one point a music career that you were doing as well. What do you think was driving that sense that you didn't have a purpose when at face value there were lots of different things that might inspire that sense of reason?
Alcohol. Definitely. It was my consumption of alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant. So it's going to, I think, one of the things that I talk to people a lot who are trying to give up, and I always state, don't think you're superhuman. You're consuming a drug that is addictive, and it's telling you all these things that aren't true. So it's not even you and your sense of willpower that can change that. You're consuming something that is chemically changing how your brain functions. So I think it's important for people to realize that I separate myself now from who I was in my addiction to who I was, because they were not the same person. One was completely mind altered chemically. And it was a very, once you put down the drink, then you've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of find it, reclaim who you were, or reinvent for some people. Some people, this has been, it's been all they've known. So it definitely was a very, very different life to what I have now. And I feel much like, I've just turned 50. I still pass out when I say that. And I'm still struggling with it. But I honestly feel more like I did when I was 18, apart from the obvious things, than I did for years in between, because life has a different purpose.
You're stronger, you're confident, you're healthier. There's so much more that is on the upside of this. And it's inspiring, because there's always got to be a point before we change where we realize we have to, right? There's something that says you cannot live like this anymore. What was that moment for you?
My hand was forced. If I'm really, really honest, and I do confess this a lot, is I don't think that it was a real conscious decision for me to stop. It was something God intervened. I remember, so I moved back to Queensland. My family kind of took over in some shape or form the care of my kids when I was, not really capable. In conjunction with me, I was living with them, but I went into rehab. And I remember before I actually went into rehab, I'd had a couple of emergency visits to the hospital where I was unresponsive, and then, it was a long journey. But I do remember I was home one day, and my stepdad had picked up the kids from school, and I was just moving into my own property. I still wasn't settled, and I definitely hadn't gone into rehab yet. And they were kind of toying with does she need to go to rehab? Does she not need to go to rehab? And he'd picked up the kids from school. I'd been at home all day. He brought them back to me, and I was supposed to not be drinking, but I'd snuck in some alcohol, and he was doing his assessment, his duty of care, to say, can I leave the kids? And he looked at me and he said, I can't leave the kids here with you tonight. And my daughter was 9, almost 10 at the time. And she looked at me and she had tears in her eyes and she said, Mum, I'm scared you're never going to get better.
Wow.
It's still, do you know what? Nothing ever. It's been, it's been probably 11 years since that happened. And it still every time chokes me. And I'm glad it does, because it's a constant reminder of that I can never live that life ever again. But, my kids were quite shielded from the alcohol. It was more they thought that I was ill. So I was very lucky. I was one of the lucky ones that had incredible support. And I truly believe at that point in time, on a cellular level, I knew things had to change. And these kids deserved a mother that was way more present, and they deserved to have a mum because, by all accounts, from what I was told, I wasn't going to be around much longer. That's how dire my health was.
Wow.
And I do remember on one emergency visit, I prayed and I just said, whatever it takes, I'll pay you back. Whatever it takes. I don't even know what that looks like, but whatever it takes, I'll do whatever it takes to get out of this situation, and I will continually pay that forward.
What's your relationship like with your kids now? I mean, they've got to learn more about your story in an age-appropriate way, obviously, as they've gotten a little bit older. How does your relationship with them kind of function now?
Honestly, I don't think, we all, I've got a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, so they've got their own struggles. But one of the things that I definitely changed in my house is the normalcy of not drinking. So my kids have thankfully had a really large period of time where it's not normal to come home from work and crack a bottle open the second you get in the door. But communication about mental health is massive in my house. No one's without their own issues, and at different times both kids have had different things going on, and we all know that they have a genetic predisposition to addiction. It's in lots of parts of our family, and we know that and mental health don't mix. So I think we're continually checking up on each other. It's very open communication, and highly aware of when they're both not non-drinkers at all, but they know that alcohol is never a good combination when you're experiencing something with your mental health that's not great.
And I think it's really good that you're honest about the challenges that still exist, whether it is, the conversations that you have with them, or even as, you continue to live your life, right? It doesn't suddenly become smooth sailing after you decide to get on this journey of sobriety, because I think people will feel like you either recover and it's perfect, or you're failing somehow. Like, what's your relationship to that sense of failure in sobriety been?
Oh gosh, no way. This is what I talk about. Just because I put down the glass doesn't mean that my life instantly got better. I had a lot of work to do. The difference is when you're doing it sober, you have clarity. You are much more logical in how you process things. At the end of the day, me being a non-drinker now doesn't stop life's challenges from coming my way. I don't have this magic shield now that is so sobriety is not a magic shield from life. But it has given me a lot better capacity to cope with what does come my way. And it's not going to be perfect, but imperfect's beautiful as well. And, I say now, I feel the highs and I feel the lows and everything in between, but I feel. When you don't feel, you're not experiencing life. And my dad, who's just gone 36 years sober,
wow,
he used to say to me, before I stopped drinking, I know that I'll cope with anything life throws at me as long as I don't drink. And I could never grasp that concept. It was like, are you kidding me? Because even when I first went to rehab, and even the first year out, I was like, I'm sure this still plays a part in my life. It's going to have to, because it can't not, But I 1000% get what he's talking about.
Yeah.
1000%. And I've had, over the last almost 10 years, I've had a lot of things happen that would normally have just sent me in this spiral of, constant drinking and medicating. But I've got through all of them. You do. And way better than what I would have if I was drinking.
Yeah. And congratulations on that, because that's not an easy thing to have done, but you've clearly put things in your life that have enabled you to do that, to process life without alcohol. What are some of those things? What's your way to go? Like, if you have an anxious thought or you do have something bad happen, what do you do now to manage that in a more positive way?
Well, I think instantly there is always a little bit better capacity to compartmentalize things and, see the trees from the forest kind of thing. But, when I got sober through what I call my foundation of wellness, which was sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And they are the pillars of what I do on a daily basis. Just to what degree will depend on where my mental health is at. And self-care is huge, 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 because if I don't do those things and make sure, in particular things like sleeping, if my sleep's not great, I have to get that under control straight away, because otherwise my mental health starts to spiral. And I'm not shy of talking. I'll go back to my psychologist. I'll do all those things. I'll tell people where I'm at. There's accountability there as well. I wouldn't say that, especially in the last, five odd years, I've not thought when something tragic comes up or there's a lot of drama that I need alcohol, but I know I need to calm down. And so it's through those other coping mechanisms that I've implemented that I can move through these things at a much better pace instead than what I would do if I was drinking.
So would you say that it's kind of like, not necessarily that you're relying on willpower, but you're more relying on healthy rhythms?
Absolutely. Healthy rhythms and routine. And I'm a massive advocate for anybody that's got challenging mental health stuff going, or just routine is so key. There's not many of us, in all truth, that can fly by the seat of our pants every day. It's like a baby. They thrive on routine, and so do we as human beings, and our brains do, and our bodies do as well. So I think, being out in nature, connecting with people, moving your body, because physiologically when we move, we're changing what happens. And that doesn't have to be a 2-hour workout in the gym. It can be just a walk around the block 10 times, whatever you've got at your fingertips. Movement is absolutely key. I was just reading something this morning, actually, from a neuroscientist that was talking about the science behind what actually happens with your brain with certain types of exercise, and how it is actually a form of medication. It changes your neural pathways, it's amazing. Yeah. So I make sure that all of those things are in place, and I pull back. I remember when I was in rehab, I had a guest speaker come in who had bipolar, and he was talking about how he almost used it as his superpower, but he was saying that when he has his episodes, his manic episodes, he pulls back on everything that's unnecessary and goes back to basics. And I've always drawn on that. And I thought, you're right. The only things that matter right now are the fundamentals, and that's eating, sleeping, and movement. And everything else can get pulled back until I'm at a capacity where I can cope with more.
And to motivate yourself to look after yourself in that way, to have a care in your physical and mental well-being, you got to believe that you're worth it, right? That you are someone who has value. How have you rebuilt that, your own sense of self-confidence and inherent value, when so much of what was happening around you for many years didn't suggest that you were worth it or could do things well?
That's a really good question. I think when you remove all of the filters, and I'm using that just as an analogy, and for me that was alcohol or medication and that type of thing, you have an ability to connect to your inner self and your soul. And I think I was lucky. I had a pretty strong sense of self-worth when I was younger, and I drew on that as well. And I won't say that, that me imparting some of my own struggles and the reward I still get from other people back to me who are struggling or can relate, and all of those things, they actually give me power. So there was an interesting exercise in rehab where we're in a group situation, and we each had to tell one another 3 things that we found inspiring or motivating about, each other and all that type of thing. And I'm a real connecty person. So, group therapy was great for me. But somebody said to me, you give me hope, because I'd already, in that short period of time, in that 8-week block in rehab, I'd made some real inroads compared to some of the others. And, I'm very lucky I did have that support from family and all that type of thing. But she said, you give me hope that I can recover. And that stuck. And I was like, geez, I didn't think I was worth that much. But then on a soul level, I was like, there's something in that. God's telling me something. There is something in that, and I know I have to do something with it. I don't know what that is, because I'm 8 weeks sober, if that, and I had no idea, but I knew that I had value to give to other people from my own experience. And that itself gives you a sense of self-worth.
Yeah, it brings a sense of value as well. And I imagine too a feeling of responsibility. Like, does it kind of, once you become an example for people, does that feel like a burden of responsibility that you've got to carry to keep being that example? No, I don't think so. It's come quite naturally for me. I'm quite an empath, so I can sense and feel, and pretty much everybody from a million miles away. I know what's going on, and I feel it. I don't think it's been a burden. I think if anything, it's been a positive thing. There is definitely an obligation and a sense of responsibility, but to me that doesn't feel like a burden whatsoever. It's my life's work, I think. That's what it's going to be. That's what it is going to continue to be. And even when I feel like, from a business perspective, maybe that's, things are not going the way that I want them to be, and something will pop up and remind me and go, you're doing the right thing. You're on the right path. It's okay. And you're creating conversation around something that is so necessary, whether, as you say, we start to move into a culture where drinking is less of a thing, where we leave it alone, as so many people have done with smoking or whatever it might be. This conversation around addiction is still so valid, because that in and of itself can affect people in so many different ways. Like, there's always a relevance to that.
Yeah, I truly think so. Definitely. And, it's not going away in the next 5 minutes. And I think it's, you spoke about sense of self-worth for how did I rebuild that in that last question. I also think we still struggle with identity, full stop, in society. And women in particular who are, become wives, mothers, or workers, who are they? With me, it's all about just finding something about yourself that you like, that's enough to make you, women say, oh, well, I've given up. I can't, I'm such and such an age now or whatever. I'm past my prime. I'm like, are you kidding? No, that's not what it's about. And I think, unfortunately, things like alcohol absolutely have an impact on exacerbating that.
And you've evolved through so many different seasons, not only in your journey with alcohol, but then there's decades of marriage, there's decades of motherhood. There's also, now you mentioned your milestone birthday of 50. Like, when you hit those different transitional moments, there are new questions invariably we all ask ourselves. Like, it doesn't matter what age you are. You do say, okay, what is this phase of my life going to look like? When you're thinking through some of those things, how do you decide on the answers? Like, as you've approached 50, what do you go, okay, this is how this decade's going to look and this is what I want from it? How do you walk through that process of questioning?
Sporadically, I think. I don't think there's one big. Sometimes I get epiphanies. Sometimes it's just I'll see something or read something and go, oh my gosh, that's where I'm at, or that's what I want. So I guess there's a little bit of influence from the outside, but at the same time, I listen to myself. I do a lot of self-questioning, and I, much more than I had done in the past, I go with gut instinct, because I truly believe that we all know what's right for us and what's not right for us. We just aren't always in the position to make those choices.
Yeah, and the clarity of mind really helps you with that.
Clarity of mind is massive. And yeah, I've made some really, really big life changes this year with before my pending 50th, as I still struggle to say it. But the end of last year and the lead up to all of that was a lot of, what do I want? Who am I? So that 50 milestone was like, well, actually, I have a finite amount of years left, and I need to be doing what makes me happy.
Yeah.
makes me really happy. And I'm like everybody else. I make mistakes or I delay decisions, procrastination through whatever reason. But I think I get to a point now where I go, enough's enough. You need to listen to yourself.
And you're certainly inspired to, again, come back to those core things of this is what I want, this is where I'm going. And as you say, like, pay it back, live a life that's paying it back, kind of becomes central to some of that.
Yeah, well, I when I talk about being a near-death alcoholic, I was. I had months to live by all accounts from, my doctors. So I see it as a second chance, and I don't want to give that away. I was given a second chance for a reason, and I will want to live this life fully, whole and complete. And, my dad says, live your life like somebody left the gate open. There's a couple of swear gates in there as well. But, live your life like someone left the gate open. That is just endless, in terms of possibilities and opportunities. And that's living your true life, your true authentic life. And there's no way that I could have done that while I was drinking, because I didn't even know what my true self or true life was. I don't think I had one.
Well, I want to ask you a question, Justine, as we wrap it up, that I ask many of our guests on the show, and I feel like we'll probably know what your answer is going to be. But this podcast, it's called Undistracted. We talk to our guests about how to live our lives intentionally around our passions, our purpose, to deal with some of the things that get in the way of that. So for you then, what would your life look like? What would you be doing if you were going to be truly undistracted, living in line with what sets you on fire? What would that look like?
Speaking on a daily basis out in the community about the importance of not medicating your mind with alcohol or drugs, writing and writing and writing. I'd have a laptop on my lap wherever I went, just giving back, being present and continuing. I want to be an example of what life is like on the other side. And I don't like the term inspiration. I actually really don't like that term, and I actually pull people up when they talk about that. I would rather be seen as hope for a life that you can have when you make these changes. I think that, to me, that's just a natural way of doing it. So I would just continue to do what I'm doing now on a larger scale.
Yeah, it's so good that you can say that, Justine. And thank you for the example that you have been and for taking the time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Justine Whitchurch, offering us such a vulnerable, authentic insight into what her journey has been like. You can read more from her in her book, Sobriety Delivered Everything Alcohol Promised. And if you do find yourself in a situation where alcohol is ruling your life, there are so many places to find help. You can go to offaddiction.com.au, head to the Australian Government's health site, health.gov.au, plenty of resources there. And if it is impacting your mental well-being, of course, call Lifeline on 13 11 14. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.